Okay, Lee, you talked in the last part about the interview process. You're probably cringing at my style here.
Not at
all. I'm still learning. But can you tell us a little bit about how, and what it entails really, especially with these long interviews where they're very important, etc.
So it's in some ways the aspect of the job I enjoy most is sitting down and talking with someone over half an hour, 45 minutes for a long interview, sort of thing that you see in the Racer Post on a Sunday. Partly I think it's because I'm nosy. So if I'm out and about with the half and I'm talking to people, he'll often say you're interviewing them as opposed to just talking to them. But I think generally people have got a lot of interesting things to say, and I like talking to people and feeling that I'm sort of stripping away layers of them and they're really giving of themselves and they're talking honestly. Now sometimes you'll interview people and you'll think, how the hell am I going to turn that into a one-page interview, let alone a two-page interview, because they've said very little that's interesting. But generally people have got interesting things to say. And I've had one or two with Jamie Spencer years ago and with Gai Waterhouse one morning at Flemington from sort of 3:30 in the morning, where I've finished the interview with them and they've been so interesting, so enthralling, so honest, that you walk away from the interview and you think, my goodness, I really hope there's been no problems on the dictaphone, no wind interference. I just can't wait to transcribe it. Partly because you want to hear it all again because it was so interesting, and partly because you can't wait to turn it into an interview. And you generally know it's going to be good when you're tapping away almost with a smile on your face, because you know this is going to really fascinate people that read it. And Jamie's interview was like that because he was very honest and spoke about personal issues with his life. And Gai was the same because she's just such a fascinating lady. She's racing royalty in Australia. She's an astonishing character. And she was, again, so insightful, so revealing in what she spoke about that you just couldn't wait to turn it into an interview.
Okay, so there are people that you've spoken to in interviews that you've found fascinating. You never know what's going to happen at the races. It could be a Monday at Kempton or it could be Royal Ascot. But what would you say the best moment in racing that you've witnessed and covered has been?
So the most enjoyable moment I've witnessed, what I didn't cover, was probably Winks winning a third Cox Plate last year. I adore Winks. I adore Australian racing. I went on a busman's holiday last year, self-funded, and watched her win that. So really loved that. In terms of moments I've reported on, I think I'd probably say Sprinter Sacra's Renaissance season gave me a huge amount of pleasure. It just so happened that I seemed to be the guy writing the report for all his races that season. So I did the Schlur Chase in November, the Tingle Creek, the Champion Chase, and I just found that a really beautiful story in terms of a horse who'd looked like he was finished but wasn't finished and came back, and to huge delight. And I found that really enjoyable to write about. In the same way, I think if you said to me what's the best thing you've done in terms of a piece of racing writing, I think I wrote about the Gold Cup last year. The Gold Cup report was one that really enjoyed doing, again, because I thought that was such that head-to-head and that long drawn-out duel between Native River and Might Bite, I thought really embodied so much of what's great about the sport. And it's often the way that writing about things that have given you pleasure are what you enjoy most, because you've walked off the stands, and I'm one of those the hacks. I always watch races if I can from the grandstand with a pair of bins. You walk away, and if you're walking with a real smile on your face, then I think you're immediately motivated to try and produce something good, because you want to convey on your laptop screen and then on in print and on mobile phones. The pleasure that you took from that and that everybody else took from it, and you want to do it justice. And I know with those Sprinter Sacre races and with that Cheltenham Gold Cup last season, that was very much the case.
And what about the best moment in racing that you wish you'd covered?
So I am hugely romantic when it comes to racing. I'm a massive enthusiast, and the race that I enjoyed watching most when I was growing up watching racing was Desert Orchids Gold Cup, and it remains my favourite horse race. When we did a poll of readers years ago to get their favourite horse race, it was Desert Orchids Gold Cup, and I think it was just the most uplifting piece of horse racing I've seen, and I think that would have been such a great thing to write about, partly because of the characters. You had such a wonderful horse, and David Elsworth is just a great guy to speak to. I remember interviewing him about 3 or 4 years ago in Newmarket, and that was again one of the most enjoyable interviews I've done. We sat in, everyone knows the Chinese restaurant in Newmarket, and we sat in there, and again he's honest, he's revealing, and again one of the moments I most remember from an interview was when we started talking about him and jumps racing. So obviously he walked away from jumps racing largely, and he spoke about how he'd had a runner at Lingfield in a steeplechase, and the horse had fallen in the home straight, and Elsie had gone down to the horse, and he said he looked at the horse and the horse looked at him, and it was like he felt the horse was saying to him, "Okay, Dad, what do I do now?" And he knew there was nothing he could do now, and he then got up from where we sat and went away for 5 minutes, because he was still moved by the memory of that, and I found that really moving as well, and welling up when I was doing that at the time. So again, he's an astonishing character, and there are a lot of people like that in horse racing. It's one thing I find. Sorry, one thing I find constantly rewarding about horse racing is that the people involved generally are immensely fond of the horses and really love the horses, and you see the reaction of lads after races and grooms after races and jockeys and trainers and owners, and I find that really rewarding. He was very much like that. He cares, and when you see someone who cares, that's marvellous.
Well, it's quite a moving story, Lee, and there's a misconception with people that are the antis of racing and stuff, that realise the passion that people feel for their horses and the amount of commitment. How do you feel that racing does in portraying its image?
I think racing as a sport actually punches above its weight to almost a remarkable degree. If you think that horse racing gets nigh on 100 days a year on mainstream television in this country, most places would they just almost wouldn't be able to get their head around that. If you go to the States, where actually things are a little bit better than the last few years with NBC picking up more days, but certainly in France, well, there's a very small window of coverage for even Arc Day. I think people will be amazed how much we get. You know, we're talking now, just not long after the York Ebor Festival, we had 4 days again of mainstream coverage on the second biggest channel in the country for 2.5 hours every day, presenting lots of stories as well as racing. You have horse racing covered, admittedly to a lesser extent than there was once the case across the national press, but still with a good strong foothold of coverage in newspapers and their online platforms. I think where so myself and the media are blessed in covering horse racing is the general accessibility of the people involved. You know, we started off these interviews today talking about Ryan Moore, but even Ryan, you know, we could get in touch, we could ring him up, and you know, he might not answer the phone, but we could ring him up. We can get right up to him on a race course. Most racing writers would have, say, Frankie's mobile number. You can ring Frankie up and you can ask him questions. If you said to us, football writer, you could do that. they would say, well, it's a very different game in our world. You know, in football, you're dealing with their agents, with their management teams, and you don't get that accessibility that we do in racing. And that's important because it's through people like Racing Post writers, like ITV broadcasters, that we present the sport to the public. So if you like, we're a medium, and we're a go-between between the consumers of the sport and the participants of the sport. And if we have this good accessibility, then hopefully it means we can better convey what's taking place to the consumers of the sport. I think where there maybe is justifiable concern is regarding how much actual interest there is in horse racing. We read a lot about attendances being strong, and about you see X number of thousands of people at a race meeting, but very often they won't actually be interested in horse racing. You know, we know from you can see from Racing Post circulation figures, from ITV viewing figures, a better handle on how many people are actually interested in racing. Because of course, racing is a very singular sport, I'd say, in that you generally wouldn't go to a football match or a rugby match unless you're interested in football or rugby. But you often will see people going horse racing that aren't interested in racing. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's great that racing is a platform for a social experience. And of course, the hope is always that you will convert people that are just going for a social experience into becoming fans of the sport. But I think we sometimes shouldn't delude ourselves that when you see a packed racecourse on Shergar Cup Day, on a Friday night at Newmarket, on a Saturday at Newbury, that all those people are racing fans. They're not. And the job is to try and convert people from being social racegoers into racing fans. I think sometimes there is a danger that racecourses become overly obsessed with getting those social racegoers to the expense of nurturing people who already love the sport and want to love the sport even more, and might be turned off the sport because of what they might seem to be as an excessive interest in people who are just going for a day out and a few drinks. You know, I wrote my column on Monday about the situation at Haydock, where attendances on some good winter jump stays have been going down year on year on year. And I know a lot of people that go to Haydock think that's because there's been an excessive reliance and motivation to attract that social pound, as opposed to genuine racegoers. So I think there is an issue there that racecourses have to be careful with. And I think ultimately, though, we shouldn't forget, and this is maybe one that's aimed more at racing professionals, that ultimately horse racing is part of the entertainment business, and racing fans are entertainment consumers. And I think we have to remember at all times that when we make decisions about racing, about what's good for racing, about how racing should be shaped now and in the future, I think we have to be thinking to a significant extent about what those racing fans want, because if people don't turn up at the races, if people don't watch racing on the TV, if people don't want to read racing writing, then there is no sport. So whilst we have to make decisions about what's best for racing PLC, if you like, I think we should never forget that racing only survives if people are interested in racing, and we have to have those people first and foremost in our thoughts at all times.